All right, welcome everyone to our December 2023 final trending topic of the year. We've got the whole band together to go through some insights, some questions from what has been an extremely interesting year in real estate, I would say. We are gearing up for obviously an exciting 2024, so we're gonna kind of freestyle this a little bit. We've got some questions to sort of go through, and hopefully we'll kind of capture all the big highlights from the year.
Love it. So we got Santa Claus, the Grinch, and the Elf.
You're the Grinch for sure.
I'm not sure yet. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, we'll let our
I'm feeling it.
Yeah, let's let the industry decide. Drop some comments down below. We'll see.
The industry's deciding.
It's always so nice working with Brittany.
So it's good for a shirt.
Yeah.
All right. So let me start actually with some things that we probably did expect. So we definitely expected that interest rates were going to play the part that they did. We knew the market was going to be impacted this year, fairly significantly. However, we also knew that with the price of construction, we know that with the development industry, they're actually really good at self-moderating as well. So managing the inventory, they have to mitigate risk. So, this idea of not just launching projects for the sake of launching, we know the industry does a very good job of self-moderating. So because of that, we knew that pricing likely was not going to fall, really. It just wasn't going to be able to do that, particularly with some of the other fundamentals. We've talked about immigration a lot over the course of the year. So we knew sales were going to be down, but we also knew that pricing really wasn't going to tank, and that it was going to be a really rocky road given, what the Bank of Canada has been trying to do to the economy. What I didn't expect, I think, was just how much of an emotional roller coaster it has been. I had this conversation with someone just last night, actually, and how consumer sentiment has changed. Like literally, one week it was pessimistic, and then the next week it was optimistic, and that pendulum swing of how people were feeling about the market, it changed so many times throughout the entire year, and it was changing hour to hour, day to day, week to week, month to month, and that was something that I don't know that I expected to have like quite these extremes in consumer sentiment throughout the entire year.
Oh yeah, I'm going to jump in here. I think that lands for me, Suze. Such a good point. I think for me, 2022 was a really interesting year, right? We saw this market come back with just ferocity. That was maybe how we would talk about Q1 and maybe even parts of Q2 of 2022. And that was on the heels of seeing rapid price escalation of mortgages, right? Interest rates, 7 increases over a 12-month period. That landed us in 4.25% going into 2023. At that point in time, we were questioning, how does this impact affordability, and then what is ahead? We also witnessed at the very beginning of the year a 5% unemployment rate. We saw GDP was still performing relatively strongly. We saw inflation was still high, and I think all of us were fearful about what was to come and how we were going to get on top of inflation. So through 2023, we saw 3 interest rate hikes, bringing that rate up to 5%, having a huge impact on variable rates. Any of those that were able to lock in fixed rates were protected for a period of time. And I think through all of that uncertainty, and certainly the unwinding of inflation, what's mind-blowing, I think, is still in with all of those headwinds, the market performed as well as it did in 2023, right? We saw an incredible amount of density come live in multiple geographies, both the Fraser Valley and Metro Vancouver. We saw some of the biggest introductions of supply into markets like Metrotown. And for the most part, all of those programs, if they were thoughtfully built, I think that if home builders did a really good job of understanding what the needs of those home buyers were, and I think that they tried to balance the relationship between value, affordability, and offering, they were successful. And I think that was something that is really, really exciting for how that sets us up for 2024, because we know that rates will continue to come off. It feels like most markets have found the right balance of price and demand. Feels like as we go into 2024, we can be really optimistic that marketplaces like Metro Vancouver, like Coquitlam, like the Fraser Valley, they're going to continue to perform because there's a steady demand, because there's just a lack of inventory in general across Canada when it comes to housing.
Yeah, I definitely think, that value proposition stands very tall. I look back to the end of 2022 where we had, programs coming to market. They were really only coming to market if they knew they were well positioned, and they had that value proposition top of mind. And so, I think all of us thought early into 2023, I think we didn't necessarily think, but we were hopeful that rates, would come off and it wouldn't continue to go up as long as it actually did. And so early part of 2023, I think the market actually felt quite strong because, that sentiment was there from the industry and from the buyers that were looking at home ownership, that those rates were going to start to come down. And then, of course, we found in the summertime and late spring that just didn't happen. And so, we started to see creative incentives come out. We saw barrier to entry start to come down for those programs that were in market, like the high streets and some of the success that BD had in Coquitlam with their programs. And, quite frankly, you had to have that value proposition and remove that barrier to entry to see those buyers actually feel confident enough to step into the market over the last 12 months. I think what we didn't anticipate was how government policy, new provincial legislation would actually factor into an already tricky market dynamic with interest rates that has just fueled the last quarter.
Yeah, I that was the other sort of thought I had when thinking about this year is we've never seen this many government policies be released in such a condensed amount of time than we have seen this year. It's wild.
Right.
Yeah.
And, what's fantastic through all that is still absorption rates have remained relatively consistent for the last 2 quarters. But when you think about 2024 and what's ahead now, some are projecting 3, some are projecting 5 potential rate decreases, right? Depending on when you think that they're going to start. It's tough to say, but it could be anywhere from 25%, 25 basis points. And some are saying that you might see as much as 100 to 125 basis points. Even as of the last 24 hours, though, you see the European Central Bank, they have a very different perspective about what the global economy is going to look like. And I think that we've been relatively insulated in Canada in terms of housing's performance because we are so underbuilt, right? And so what is compromising Vancouver and Fraser Valley's affordability is not true in other parts of the world to the same degree. And so I think that that's really interesting how we manage interest rates against our currency in the United States over the next 12 months. And I think it's hard not to be optimistic about what Canadian housing prices will do over the next 12 months because of where we're at today.
Yeah, and on that note, when we take a step back just to look at what was released onto the market, just over 11,000 pre-sale homes released onto the market. That is half of what we saw in 2021. That's 20% below our 10-year average. And so you have to believe that as the rates come down and people come off the sidelines and jump in, we've just had, another massive year of very low inventory numbers. 2019 was also another number. We had very low sales transactions, low inventory volumes. And so we're going to need that supply to come in market very, very quickly. And we're going to see those prices run, particularly if we can't get it onto the market quite quick enough.
What's shocking about it is that by the end of 2024, 3 of the previous 5 years will have been less than half of the total number of inventory that should have found its way onto the market that we traditionally see in the Metro Vancouver and Fraser Valley. That is a shocking number, right? And you think about the upward pressure that places on the marketplace in 2025, 2026, and 2027.
Yeah, and we need that rate relief because mortgage holders have seen their payments essentially double since these rate increases began. And that's just a hard place for a lot of people to be for a sustained period of time. So I think everyone's looking forward to those rate cuts. Have you
looked into that number? Have you seen the number? Like the total increase from like where it was maybe 12 months ago to where it is today?
Yeah, well, I think like $130,000 household income, what you could have afforded before was like $770,000 home. And now after all of these rate increases, you can now only afford a $600,000.
It's like a 20 to 22% reduction in affordability. It's just shocking how much that has changed so quickly.
And I will say the townhouse market, specifically in the Fraser Valley, just had the biggest, most significant hit, right? Like we actually saw projects come to market in this form, and it just that the rate of absorption has been so low, and that is just simply due to that affordability factor. It's like anything under $1 million, we're seeing a bit of activity, but anything over is just absolutely quiet. And I do believe that that's about to shift, and that townhouse market should be something that buyers are really looking at right now as an opportunity, specifically in Langley and Surrey.
Yeah. Now, Britt, you touched on the government policies and the myriad of policies that were released this year, what do we think is going to have the most impact out of those policy changes?
Well, I mean, I can't help but think like affordability is top of mind. I think I've had 4 calls simply alone this week talking about some of the new rules with respect to the BC building code and how that impacts affordability. You know, some saying, you know, that extra 60 to 75 square feet per every single unit to be adaptable within a new project effective of March 2025 now is, you know, $60K on that end user's bottom line. You look at the step code regulations and some of the changes that are coming out there. We were at a UDI event a few weeks ago, and Sean Bouchard is just so passionate about this, you know, was sharing, you know, that extra $6,000 on a purchase, you know, wouldn't be made up by that buyer until like 120 years later in terms of cost savings on energy efficiency. So it's like, is it really worth that, you know, 10,000 more if in the lifetime of that entire building, they're never going to see efficiency from it? And so, I mean, that is just one thing, and we're not even getting into, you know, provincial policies. There's a lot more than that to cover today. So,
sure, my take on that is aligned with yours, Britt. I think the first thing that we have to think about is going to be construction cost escalation, right? That's been one of the biggest challenges for all of home builders across Canada to deal with in 2021, 2022, and 2023. They have escalated so dramatically from where they were. And I think that presents huge headwinds in the ability to get density out of the ground. And I can't even think about what it must feel like to have sold programs in 2021 and halfway through your building cycle find that construction costs have increased anywhere from 15 to 40% in some cases. But I think step code, right? Adaptive units. To put that in perspective, you have a $400,000 home today that we are fighting to deliver in the marketplace, right? We're trying to get down to $400,000 in many different jurisdictions in the form of concrete, and that goes to $460 after you see this implementation. That's a really scary thought, right? An increase well over 10% to unfortunately the aggregate. I think that's a concern, and then the other consideration that I think looking forward has to be how deep does this recession go, right? And how long are these rates elevated? I think there's a lot of fear leading into the beginning of Q3 that this is going to be far longer and far deeper than most had anticipated. It feels like there's been an unwinding of that thought in the last 2 to 3 months, but I can't help but think that we're just not out of it yet, right? We'll start to collect data in the new year, and I think that we need to be really responsive and reactive. And I think that'll be one of the biggest challenges. Is what we don't want is a stutter step. A step forward and then 2 steps backwards. And
which we saw this year to some degree.
we did.
We thought we understood it. We thought we had inflation under control. What we learned was that it was anything but that. And that had a huge impact to so many different leaders within our industry, basically impacting everyone across Canada as a result today.
Yeah. Now, if I can be positive for a second, I guess I'm definitely not the Grinch then. One of the changes that I am sort of looking forward to is the additional density around transit-oriented development. So obviously I think the cities are still working their way through what this means for them. But I think we can all agree that density around transit nodes just makes a lot of sense. And so being able to have that approved and in the community planning, I think is going to be particularly beneficial. Now, I will say, and maybe the perspective that needs to be said is that by the time you get through the city process and deliver those homes, we're likely not going to see the effect of that for potentially 5 or more years, unfortunately. And I think that's something that maybe people aren't realizing or thinking about. But it starts with this step because it can't happen in 5 years if it doesn't start today. And from that perspective, I'm excited to see how that works its way through the landscape.
What do you think the knock-on impact will be long-term?
Well, I mean, my hope is that there's just more support for some of that additional density in those areas that we know is needed, especially now with some of the parking requirement changes that kind of go hand in hand with that. Again, the construction costs are such a big issue for developers. And what we know for sure is that if it's adding to cost, buyers have to pay for it, right? it always trickles down to the buyer. So being able to have that support of that additional density, have some support for flexibility on parking, that will hopefully offset some of these other changes, bigger units because they're less efficient perhaps. And it's going to give them perhaps a bit more confidence to be able to move ahead. And at the end of the day, we need more homes, period. So this is one way of getting more homes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, maybe I am the Grinch. I think all of that is fantastic. I think the challenge to development partners, particularly on the nodes, especially with a minimum 20-story, is just, making those performance actually make sense, right? Like, we want to see density in Langley, we want to see density in, municipalities like Maple Ridge, which is proposed, but are those municipalities ready for anything over 20 stories? And really, do those numbers make sense in a concrete form for those development partners to build it and bear the risk that comes with building concrete format in that scale and size? So I definitely think there's some work still to be done to understand, how we actually logistically make that a success for the developers that actually have to execute on these changes.
Sure, but the next project that gets submitted isn't going to be for 20 stories in Maple Ridge. It's going to be 20 stories at Rupert.
Right.
20 stories at Renfrew, right? Like, developers in our industry, I think, are smart and they are assessing that demand constantly. And that's where we play a role too, right? To help them understand where that depth of demand is. And so, that piece isn't coming in the next 5 years. That piece is going to come probably beyond. But there are stops well along that SkyTrain station further west that are ready for it, that I think can handle it, that hopefully will see the benefit of it.
That said, they have the land, they're ready to go, and now because the market's not there to bear it, they just have to hold longer. If the requirement is there but the market won't bear it, they still have to face the implications of the zoning change, quite frankly. Even if, to your point, it's not the first to be developed, they might have been planning 6-story, which was going to be profitable for them, and now this will cause them delays in the long run to be able to actually execute on what was originally planned.
I think that if I'm a home buyer, though, and I'm in the marketplace today, and this would be a very optimistic position, but what we do know is that construction costs are likely to hold, right? And maybe there's a degree of relief, but minimum wage is not dropping. The cost to produce any good or service, for the most part throughout the world, is not dramatically decreasing. And so as a result of that, I think you can expect that, locally construction costs are going to be close to where they are today, probably in 12 months from now. And if that's the case, that's one of the biggest inputs that goes into the performa. And if that holds, then, and presumably, maybe land values fluctuate to a degree, but the deal breaker on the performa comes down to what it costs to produce. And I think that producing housing today with all of the step code changes is just dramatically more expensive than it would have costed 5 years ago. And what we do know is that we just have so much immigration that's selecting Canada as maybe, and Metro Vancouver specifically, as one of the best places to consider raising a family or considering moving future generations forward. And so as a result of that, you have demand, construction costs will hold. And I think what we have to see is price escalation, or we have to see increased affordability. And there's some measures there that the Bank of Canada can look at and that the Office of the Superintendent can look at to be able to help improve affordability today, right? We can understand some unwinding potentially of amortization periods. We can also look at the stress test as a way to increase affordability, but we have to see price escalation in order for these programs. Rupert, for example, I don't think anything is going to go forward in Rupert, in that location on SkyTrain, on transit, unless you have something that can be delivered above $1,400 or $1,500 per square foot for concrete, right? And trying to find concrete working under $1,150 right now anywhere in British Columbia is near impossible. And so I think that's the one piece that we need to watch really closely in 2024 and 2025. But I'm an optimist. I think the market's going to find it. I think it has to, because I don't see government practices or policy shifts catching up quickly. And so what we have to bank on is price escalation. If I'm a home buyer and I'm looking long, today home ownership across Canada kind of ranges, but it's kind of between 60 and 65% depending on different marketplaces. You compare that to New York, it's closer to 50%. You compare that to European and Asian metropolitan destination cities, it's closer to 33%. So I think over time, we're going to see home ownership drop from the 60s into the 50s. But anyone that does own a home, I think what you can bank on over the next 5 years is a really strong appreciation level, because you have to find a way for prices to increase to be able to afford the construction costs. Okay, I think next up we should just let's spend a little bit of time just talking about rental, right? I know that's just top of mind in every meeting right now. You can't open the papers and not understand how different levels of government are really trying to find ways of bringing housing, and rental is going to be one of those, part of that solution at least. I know for us as an organization, we're working on about 4,500 units right now of rental, of purpose-built rental across Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. When I compare it to where we were 5 years ago, it is a 10x, right, on our commitment in that space. I'm kind of curious, where do you think that the rental market will go in 2024?
Yeah, well, I mean, the work that we're currently doing, you speak about those 4,500 homes that are going to be delivered in the next 18 months. The purpose-built rental market for development partners is actually becoming a lot more sophisticated. I think overall there is certainly less of a stigma around, rental and people not wanting to necessarily be in a rental building, or they would prefer to purchase. I think that door is certainly opening. I think buildings are a lot more sophisticated in terms of their amenity offerings. One of the things that come along with the purpose-built rental for our development partners is actually quite a significant contribution to amenity programming, and so therefore they make the buildings actually quite appealing. I do think it's been quite stable over the last 6 months in terms of rental rates, but as we're starting to see these developments get more sophisticated, the programming starts to change. The homes get a bit smaller, more compact, but more livable. They still have the storage solutions, and those rental numbers are actually fairly capped, but the sizes are a bit smaller.
Yeah, I have to say it's not inconceivable to think that in 10 years from now, maybe less, that the experience of living in a purpose-built rental building is actually exponentially better than living in a typical market tower, because our rental stuff is getting way more sophisticated. Those of us in the industry, I think we've looked at some of the purpose-built rental that happens down in the States quite a bit, and the amount of programming and community planning. These operators are providing spin classes and fitness instructors and cooking lessons and social events and all of those sorts of things. And so the amount of community that can get created in these buildings on an ongoing basis, and to your point, the amount of amenity that's being now put into these rental buildings versus, again, 10 or 15 years ago, it was getting very little. Whereas now the quality of these rental buildings are exponentially higher, which again leads back to the stigma of that. And I think that the living experience in those buildings could potentially be really, really positive for people.
Yeah, and I think they're professionally managed for the most part, all of these buildings. And so I think renters actually see that quite a bit more appealing than, the one-off mom and pop rental that they can get in a four-market building, where it's just, they never know when someone might sell it or their living situation might change. And so these buildings actually become quite appealing for long-term rental, where they know that they have that stability and just that overall professionalism on the back end that they just might not be getting in four-market buildings.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned the word stigma, but I think as the perspective around rental changes, it shifts across Canada. I think you're going to see a number of really thoughtful development partners that are going to push into that space heavier in the future than they have in the past. And that's not too uncommon to what happened in the 80s and the 90s, when you had far better policy to support the build out of rental across Canada. I think we're witnessing maybe some of that urgency today, more so than we have in the last 10 years. And I think you're right. You're going to see price per square foot increase. Aggregates, they're going to be a bit more stickier in terms of what you can charge for a one bedroom home or a 2-bedroom home as apartment. And I love the thought that more thought will be put into amenitization, right, and community. I think also, as home ownership drops, and we do expect that to happen over the next decade across Canada, it's hard to say whether it's going to land in the mid 50% range, but certainly it will begin to unwind from where it is today because of the lack of affordability. So those that choose for market housing in pre-sale, new construction housing, or the resale market, I think what they can expect is escalation of price. And I think that they can expect growth in their equity in their home. And I think those that choose not to participate in that game and choose instead to have more flexibility, maybe a little more fluid lifestyle, maybe something that's more supported by community, they're going to find that in apartments. And I love that you can find both solutions in Metro Vancouver. better tomorrow than you were ever able to in the past.
Yeah. I mean, we still need interest rates to come down to help make those numbers work for our development partners, but it's an exciting landscape ahead, I think.
Yeah, the 5% GST savings, of course, is one step in the right direction as well to, continue to see that funnel of lease-up buildings start to, come to fruition. Unfortunately, it wasn't retroactive, so a lot of those buildings, completing now are not reaping those benefits. But I think overall, a step in the right direction there.
Okay, well, let's move on to another thought. So the programs that did go into the market this year, there were a few that were very successful. How would you guys define success this year? What were some of the traits for the successful projects this year?
I'll kick this off. I think what was really enjoyable about 2023 is that every community was a little bit different, right? And so what it took to be competitive in Metrotown was very different than Coquitlam, which was very different than Langley. And I think that was part of the magic of this year. And I think that the development partners, you said it on pretty much every Presale Pulse this year, thoughtfully designed homes are going to win, right? Operators that are good operators are going to win. And I think that that's what we witnessed. And the programs that really leaned in to finding what their home buyers or what their tenants needed and then found ways to deliver that, I think that those were part of the success story veins of gold. The other piece that really stood out for me is that the development partners that we had the opportunity of working with that have spent a considerable amount of time building their brand over the last 5 years and truly leaning into customer care, right? Like really leaning in to what thoughtful design practices look like, that truly have lent in to being an active participant in the communities that they're engaged in. It also felt like they were rewarded this year because the market responded more positively to their programs than maybe to some of the competitors around them.
And those things go hand in hand, I think, like well-conceived product, well-conceived homes, good design, that's always been one of the strongest risk mitigators that you can do, right? Especially because we plan these projects so far in advance that by really agonizing over every detail, making sure that the product is the best that it can be, that it matches the demand that's out there, et cetera, that's going to get you through a difficult year like we had this year. But through that agonizing and that well-conceived product, you do create a following, you do create a legacy, you do create brand equity in that, and that's what fuels the next sale and the next downturn when you've got these group of buyers that have had a really successful experience with you already. And so to me, those things genuinely go hand in hand.
Yeah, the last piece I'll add to that is just removing the barrier to entry, right? Like educating buyers, educating the industry on historic times in the market where we've seen these lulls and how quickly it's kind of fired up and come back. And really that just created such an opportunity for those that were on the sidelines and actually stepped in. We saw success on programs that got creative with incentive offerings. Deposit campaigns were massive over the last 12 months. Of course, many projects cannot accommodate 5% deposits or really anything less than 10 to 15%. That said, the ones that did and they found the way, really saw huge volume in their programs. I think at High Street with their deposit bond program, you think about what Quadra just recently did in Langley, 5% deposits. And so although there is certainly an increased risk for our development partners when they go that route, I think just removing that barrier to entry and just making it really easy and simple for people to get their foot in the door really helped the programs that saw success the last 12 months.
Yeah, and I think we spend a lot of our time definitely on the product with our development partners, but of course, market timing and strategy, both to your point, incentive and offering, but also just exactly how you roll out those programs. And, when you kind of rip the Band-Aid and go for it, I think about the timing that we had with Como, with Strand, and how strategic that was and how many conversations we had about that. You think about what Anthem did with Citizen in Metrotown and their timing, and they were able to get out just ahead of everyone else. And I think they really reaped the benefits of that. And so I think that market timing piece, and when you work with a group, like ours, we spend a lot of time strategically thinking about those sorts of elements, and the people that can kind of really put all of those things together, I think did well this year.
Yeah, I need to touch on that. You mentioned some brands there that are just, they've been incredible partners to be involved with, because One piece that definitely stands out is just the courage that it takes to follow along with some of those strategies, right? To really stand tall. I think a little bit about those moments where you're in the starting blocks against a competitor and you're both ready to go and you're offset by 2 weeks. And they're going to go out hard and into a fast sprint. And your strategy is different than theirs because what you're looking long on is performa, right? And the courage that it takes in those moments to let them get a couple steps ahead, only to know that the long game is really going to be about performance. It's really going to be about program success. It's going to be about how do we support our realtor partners that are incredible in terms of helping us drive success long term for those brands in those communities. I love those moments because they're hard when you're in the moment, but you reflect back and you're like, oh, thank goodness we made these decisions. The other piece that kind of stands out for me as you're speaking there was how hard I think our team, quite frankly, works at strategy, right? That's a share that I think we have a lot of pride in. We know that understanding the marketplace, we have a responsibility for it, and I think a lot of the partners that we're working with, they really understand that market. They're touring product weekly or monthly, and that just sets everyone up to drive success. And the teams that do that, I find are having fast absorptions. They understand the value that they're creating, and I think home buyers are responding because of that.
Yeah, now let's think forward for a sec. 2024, what are the markets we're most excited about?
Sure. Easy for me. I kind of want to go like top 3 markets, like 1, 2, and 3. What are they going to be?
Oh, I feel like we're all going to have a bit of a difference of opinion here, but really just 2 for me, definitely. Well, actually, I'm going to keep it with 1, but 200 Street Corridor in Langley for sure. Will there be lots of change there? If you haven't been following any of the 2040 plans that Township has put out, worth checking that out. Huge shifts there. Still a great opportunity to be pioneering some great land buy opportunities. And some really great opportunity for buyers. And then I just think anywhere along SkyTrain expansion right now is top of mind for me. So, Fleetwood, Cloverdale, Clayton, and downtown Langley, all areas that maybe I might be too premature actually for 2024. But as we're looking at the next 24 months would be areas that I'd be watching very, very closely and I think are the biggest opportunity.
I don't know how you pick one. I think I do what I do because I can get excited about almost any market.
True.
So I don't know, like definitely Langley is I think a standout. I get very excited about some of the sort of urban centers that are being created. So Surrey City Centre, West Coquitlam, Metrotown, Brentwood, everything that's happening around Oak Ridge. I think Richmond's a really interesting market, sort of poised for maybe a little bit more inventory to come a market if it can be again just well conceived and well done. And oh my gosh, the list goes on and on and on. I feel like
I'm going to kick off. Okay, so I'm going to start with Langley. I do believe that we'll see strong performance. It rose quickly, it dropped quickly, it will come back because there's a lot of inventory there that will be affordable, and I think that you have to pay attention to that. I think West Coquitlam. There's incredible change that's happening in that community. I think it's going to be one of the most livable communities that you can find in the Lower Mainland and get really excited about that. And I think the secondary markets, this Airbnb shift is dramatic. It's going to reset values. When it does find that bottom, I think that there's going to be, again, enhanced affordability. And I think that you're going to continue to see working from distance, a big part of the Canadian economy. And so those secondary markets, once they find that new value formula and it's reset, you can't not be optimistic about what happens in places like Langford or maybe in the Okanagan, right? Specifically Kelowna, Penticton, Kamloops, or maybe even a little bit further, right? Like places that are a little bit smaller, right? Maybe sitting population sizes between 10,000 and 20,000 that haven't gone through that growth, that are still within like 1 hour of maybe an airport or really good access points. I think they're going to see still a lot of upward pressure because, quite frankly, concrete is going to hold at $1,200 a square foot. And if you're trying to raise a family, it's very difficult to get into townhouses for less than 1.1, 1.2. And so these secondary markets have to play a role.
all right. I think that's enough for today, right? We've got our team is working right now on our full 2024 forecast. So be on the lookout for our MLA Intel, which will be hitting you up early in the new year, which we're very excited to release. We do that annually. You can go back and look at our previous predictions if you want. But we're really excited to drop that early in the new year. And this is my gosh, this is December. This is another year gone.
I almost forgot that you were wearing those antlers.
They're still here. It adds a lot of credibility, I think, to everything that comes out of my mouth.
I would say they enhance it.
Yeah.
On that note, happy holidays. Thank you for viewing, and we'll see you next year.